They found the dinner plates still warm. It was March of 1861 when Sergeant Thomas Vale of the 4th Union Cavalry was sent into a remote stretch near the Sabine River to investigate what locals had called the Hill of Waiting. Rain had carved trenches into the dirt path, and the men's boots sank deep with every step, but what they found chilled them more than the weather ever could. An entire settlement, 17 hand-built structures, a chapel, a bell tower, even a schoolhouse, stood intact, but not a single soul walked the paths. Clothes still hung to dry. Candles were burned halfway down. Tables were set, and in the chapel the heavy bell swung lightly, as if touched by an invisible hand. No signs of struggle, no blood, no bodies, just emptiness. The town record said 138 people lived there. Families, children, craftsmen, gone, without so much as a footprint leading away. And above the door to the chapel, one phrase carved in cedar, "Be still, the end has begun." If this story already has your skin crawling, then you're exactly where you're supposed to be. This is Whispers in the Cellar, where history's most unsettling secrets come back gasping for air. Like, share, subscribe, and tap the bell. Because the next time someone disappears into the past, we might be the only ones listening. Now let's go back. Before the silence. In the summer of 1837, Ezra Palmdale arrived in Liberty, Texas. He was a drifter then, a former preacher turned traveling revivalist who claimed he'd walked with the being between hours during a thunderstorm outside Shreveport. He told a crowd gathered at a crossroads sermon that the world would end not with fire, not with flood, but with stillness, and that those who waited faithfully would pass through to the other side. It was an odd message for such a booming land, where settlers carved homes from cedar and pushed cattle through wild rivers. But Ezra had something most didn't. Calm. A terrifying, perfect calm. He never shouted, he never sweated. His eyes were always clear. When storms rolled in and others ran for cover, he'd stand barefoot in the mud and whisper hymns no one recognized. They started calling him the Still Man. By autumn, he had 12 families following him, good men, honest women, most with children in tow. They sold their belongings and followed Ezra east toward the forested stretch above the Sabine River. He promised them a new sanctuary, untouched by war or sin, a place to wait for the Red Star. Locals mocked them at first. But when Ezra's followers refused to curse, refused to fear, refused even to speak of sickness or war, they started to seem different, too quiet, too certain. And when their wagons disappeared into the trees, no one stopped them. They called the place Refuge Hill. It took 6 months to build. 18 structures, hand-carved altars, a bell tower made from hollowed pine, no alcohol, no gambling, no metal above the waist. Ezra believed iron disturbed the soul's sleep. Every night at sunset they sang a single note together and then fell into silence. Children were raised with new stories. They didn't learn about government or maps or gold. They learned about the fold between time, about the gate behind the stars, and about the red voice, a being who would call to them when the final sky turned red. They weren't just waiting. They were preparing. The journals that remain, buried in hollow logs and found decades later, paint a surreal picture. Families digging long, shallow trenches they called soul beds. Ezra claimed those who lay in stillness would not decay, would not scream, and would rise when the veil lifted. But it wasn't all sermons. In 1841, a man named Merritt Clove attempted to leave the community with his pregnant wife. The next morning, the wife was found alone, staring blankly from the chapel steps. Merritt was gone, The official explanation? He walked too soon. She gave birth 3 months later. The child, a boy named Tobias, would become one of Ezra's most devoted followers. As the years passed, more joined. Some came from miles away. Letters written by former friends and family describe glowing praise. I've never seen a child weep there. They say time feels different. They've seen the red star already. It just hasn't reached us yet. But one journal, unsigned, gives another glimpse. Ezra no longer walks the same. He doesn't blink unless reminded. He prays into corners and speaks with no one there. Last night I heard something under the floorboards. It hummed. By 1850, Refuge Hill had 138 members. Not one had left, and not one would ever be seen again. We'll continue next with the man who claimed to be Ezra's second mouthpiece, and the ritual that ended in a child vanishing mid-prayer. The second mouthpiece didn't speak for the first 3 years he lived in Refuge Hill. His name was Elijah Meeks, a gaunt, rail-thin carpenter from Louisiana who arrived in 1842. His wagon bore no supplies, only a single red stone the size of a clenched fist, and a letter he claimed Ezra had written in a dream. The letter, he said, guided him to the mouth of the Still Ones. According to Ezra, Elijah had been chosen to hear in echoes and speak only when the red voice wished to reveal itself again. Elijah worked silently, mending floorboards, carving symbols into beams, and building something the others were told not to question. A wooden lattice structure that hung above the chapel altar, shaped like a spider's web. The children feared him. Even Tobias Clove, now 12, and seen by many as the community's firstborn prophet, refused to sit near Elijah during the evening songs. Elijah's eyes twitched at strange moments. He never blinked during storms. And when he finally did speak, it wasn't with his voice. It was during the Festival of Folding, a celebration Ezra had instituted every 7th equinox. No fire, no food, just fasting and silence beneath the stars. On the last night, all members laid side by side in their soul beds and whispered the phrases they had memorized since childhood. Stillness is the gate. Wait and be counted. Listen for the hum. But this time, a child, Sarah Burrows, age 8, spoke out of turn. She stood up from her trench, eyes closed, and began singing. The melody had no words, only a low, hypnotic chant that spiraled upward like smoke. And, as she sang, Elijah sat upright for the first time that evening and echoed her song, perfectly in tune, but backward. The entire gathering rose to their knees. Ezra said nothing. Then the wind stopped, not slowed, stopped. Birds froze mid-flight. Leaves ceased falling. The smoke from a nearby candle curled and hung in the air like a thread of silk pinned to glass. And Sarah vanished. No scream, no movement, just the echo of her chant, lingering in the chapel walls. The next morning, Ezra declared it proof. The red voice has marked a new path, he said, and the girl has stepped into the fold. From then on, the children were taught a new phrase. When the song calls, do not answer. Only listen. Elijah took on a new role. He sat near the altar during evening silence, humming barely audible tones under his breath. He began sketching strange diagrams into the soil. Spirals with breaks, ladders that climbed sideways, faces drawn with no mouths. Tobias, now entering manhood, began writing his own scriptures based on dreams he claimed to have inherited from his father, dreams of metal staircases buried under dirt and red hands pushing from the earth. Meanwhile, the outside world was changing. Texas had become a state. Railways carved across the land like veins. The Civil War loomed. And yet, no one from Refuge Hill emerged. No taxes paid, no children enrolled in schools, no contact. By 1857, regional authorities labeled them a ghost sect, an abandoned cult, or perhaps a fever camp. But one man, Henry Delane, a traveling post rider, claimed he saw a procession walking across the woods near the old cattle trail. "White robes," he said, "candles and daylight, children carrying long red cords. They weren't lost. They knew where they were going." Rumors began to spread. Some said Ezra had made a pact with an angel buried beneath the Sabine. Others whispered that the red voice was not a god, but something older, something from before language. The journals found later describe an increase in ritual: daily fasts, structured silence, burial rehearsals, and what Tobias called the waiting chairs, wooden seats carved from a single tree that faced the chapel's inner wall. Each bore a name, painted in blood-red resin. 12 names. One of them was Sarah's. One of them had no name at all. On September 9th, 1859, a tremor shook the Sabine Valley. Refuge Hill recorded it in their logbook not as a natural event, but as the knocking. That same night, Ezra collapsed mid-prayer and did not rise. Tobias led the congregation forward. He declared, "The fold has begun to peel. We must bury awake." From that night onward, every family was told to dig a soul bed long enough for 2. By 1860, Refuge Hill had grown quiet. The laughter of children, once heard during spring chores and orchard walks, had vanished entirely. In its place, humming. Low, rhythmic, patient humming. Sometimes in unison, sometimes layered like rounds in a funeral choir. Each family had taken to sleeping in pairs, parent and child, husband and wife, within the soul beds they had dug for themselves months prior. Ezra's journal called it rehearsal for the crossing, but no one knew what the crossing was. Tobias Clove, now 25, rarely left the chapel anymore. He lived within its clay walls like a hermit priest, speaking only in verses. "You must know the rhythm of stillness," he once told Elijah, who hadn't spoken aloud since the incident with Sarah Burroughs. The other followers obeyed, though with increasing unease. People were fading, not all at once, but week by week. First it was Noah and Lillian Barrick, an elderly couple whose soul bed had collapsed during the last rain. They were found not in their trench but in the chapel, seated silently in 2 of the waiting chairs, their eyes open, mouths closed, and no sign of trauma. Their bodies were warm, alive but unreachable. Days later, they stopped breathing. Tobias did not allow burial. He ordered the bodies wrapped in waxed linen and seated upright in the corner of the chapel with cloths over their eyes. "They are not gone," he insisted. "They are paused." The next to vanish were the Hargreaves twins, Eli and Ruth, who disappeared after reciting the song of Sarah backwards in the orchard. Their shoes were found beneath the hanging tree. From outside, none of this was visible. Refuge Hill had become a legend, the kind whispered about in saloons and campfire tales. Some said it was cursed. Others said it had vanished entirely. But a few, the old postman Henry Delane among them, swore they still saw smoke rising every Sabbath evening. Thin, gray, and steady. Back inside Refuge Hill, Tobias prepared the final phase. "The red voice has hummed long enough," he wrote. "Now it must feed." He began carving names into the altar wood. Not the living, those who had passed, but beside each name he left space for a second. Each pairing had a matching soul bed. He said the fold would open when every chair had its watcher, and every watcher had someone willing to stay buried beside them. At this, several families began to panic quietly. Though no one defied Tobias publicly, tension grew. Elijah stopped humming. Children began waking with nosebleeds. A baby was born with no tongue. Then came the knocking. Not thunder, not gunshots. A slow, deliberate pounding from beneath the chapel. Once every hour. No tools, no footsteps, just one knock, as if someone were beneath the floorboards, testing the wood. Tobias ordered candles placed at every doorway. He began drawing symbols in sheep's blood, an hourglass split in half, a serpent eating its own tongue, and a blindfolded eye leaking red tears. He wore no shoes and walked the chapel in silence. He told the congregation the voice was shifting into them, that each knock was a question. You must answer without speech, he told them. Answer by stillness. And so they did. When the knocking came, they froze, not just physically, but in thought, in memory. They trained themselves to blink only between knocks. Even breathing became ritualized. On the 13th night of the knocking, every soul bed was occupied, all but one. One chair, one trench, remained empty. It was the one with no name. Tobias held a final sermon on the hill. He said the voice had chosen its final speaker. And then he walked down into the last trench, holding only a shard of the red stone that Elijah had once brought from Louisiana. The knock came once more. Tobias whispered, "Now." And the sky went silent. The silence that followed Tobias's descent into the trench was not ordinary silence. It was oppressive, swollen, as if even the insects had ceased to exist. For the next hour, no one in Refuge Hill moved. No one breathed above a whisper. The entire congregation stood outside the chapel, staring at the open earth where their leader had vanished. And then, the knock returned. But this time, it did not come from beneath. It echoed from the trees, the soil, the very bones of the chapel. It was no longer a knock. It was language, wordless but understood, felt more than heard. Every follower dropped to their knees. Some wept, others giggled in terror. One woman collapsed entirely and was never seen again. That night, the chairs began to move, not violently, subtly. Every morning, they would be found in different arrangements, facing new directions, closer to the soul beds, closer to the door. The chair with no name began appearing in strange places. The orchard, the creek, once at the edge of a child's bed. No one saw it move. It simply changed location between dusk and dawn. Elijah returned to carving. He inscribed the chapel's inner walls with what he called the spiral's grammar. Phrases backwards, shapes overlapping, language knotted like roots. When asked what they meant, he only said, "The voice remembers differently." Tobias never re-emerged. His trench remained undisturbed, though some swore they heard breathing from it. Deep, rhythmic, matching the knock. And so leadership passed quietly to Miriam Alcott, a midwife who had once delivered Sarah Burroughs and had been with the community since the early days. Miriam did not speak often, but when she did, the others listened. She declared a fast until the next solstice. No one was to eat, no one was to leave. "We are being watched," she said, "and the final invitation is being written." The invitation, it turned out, came in the form of dreams. Every single member of Refuge Hill began reporting identical visions: a red river beneath the chapel, a bridge made of bone, and Tobias, his eyes hollow, his hands buried in soil, beckoning them forward. He never spoke, but he mouthed a word: "Fold." They began preparing. Wax seals were burned. Names were crossed from ledgers. The last of the children were wrapped in white cloth and given a drop of tincture that sent them into dreamless sleep. Miriam called it the mercy cup. Their bodies were not buried, but laid at the edge of the orchard in a circle around a tree that had never borne fruit. On the final night of the year, the soul beds were filled, and then all knocking stopped. Silence again, but this time dead, hollow, like a lung exhaled and never filled again. It was Henry Delane, the old postman, who broke the silence from the outside world. After nearly 2 decades, he returned to Refuge Hill on a dare. He found no gate, no path, just an overgrown field where the chapel should have been. But the foundation was there, charred, like something had burned upward instead of down. He found 12 chairs, rotted but upright, facing a blackened altar stone, and a 13th chair, buried halfway in the dirt as if it had tried to leave and was pulled back. The land smelled of wax and ash and blood. In the days that followed, officials were summoned. Excavations began, and what they found was inconclusive. No bodies, only scraps, lace cloth, candle stubs, a red stone broken in 2. Beneath the soil, narrow trenches had been dug and then collapsed inward, as if someone had buried the diggers while they were still inside. And near the chapel's foundation, buried beneath 7 feet of earth, they uncovered the final piece. A mural, painted in blood and sap, faint but intact. It showed a spiral staircase leading downward, and at its base, a door with no handle. Behind it, an eye, red and weeping, watching from the other side. By the time news of the mural reached Galveston, the tale of Refuge Hill had already become folklore, dismissed by most as a ghost story or backwoods hysteria. But one man, a private scholar named Dr. Elias Monroe, didn't laugh. He packed his journals, borrowed a camera apparatus, and took the next mail wagon north. Dr. Monroe had studied religious cults for 20 years, but this, Refuge Hill, was something different. There were no manifestos, no threats, no altars of blood or fire. Only the silence, the absence, a town that vanished not in rebellion but in surrender. He arrived in what had once been Refuge Hill in spring of 1883. The land was silent, save for birdsong and the occasional wind through broken trees. But something was wrong. The birds never came close to the chapel's foundation. They circled, called, and vanished, as if the earth warned them away. He documented everything: the 13 chairs, the altar stone, the foundation mural. He dug soil samples, took wax rubbings of symbols carved into the chapel floor. Every night he dreamed of Tobias, not the man, but the trench, always open, always beckoning. Monroe stayed longer than planned. 2 weeks became 5. His notes turned erratic. Pages were filled with repeating symbols, curved lines, spiral equations. He stopped eating meat. Then he stopped speaking aloud. A local farmer found him wandering the riverbank at dawn, drawing doors into the mud with his fingers, humming something that didn't sound human. The farmer brought Monroe back to Galveston. He spent his final years in an asylum, never uttering a coherent sentence again. But before his decline, Monroe managed to send one letter. One final report. It said, "The voice isn't buried, it's folded. Like paper, like memory. You cannot kill an invitation once it's written." Refuge Hill was the reply. That letter made its way to the state archives, where it was ignored for over 50 years. Until 1941. A WPA photographer named Helen Reese, documenting forgotten towns in East Texas, came across Monroe's archived material. The spiral drawings caught her attention first, then the letter, then the photographs, particularly one image of the 13 chairs. But the image was wrong. There were 14 chairs in the photo, and none of them had shadows. Helen thought it a trick of exposure. She traveled to the coordinates listed in Monroe's notes, expecting to find nothing. But the ground remembered. The foundation stones were gone, taken by locals for barns and fencing. But the soil had not healed. It was black, dry. And when she stepped across the boundary, her camera jammed. None of her photographs developed. That night, in the roadside inn where she stayed, Helen was awoken by knocking. First faint, then closer, then from under the bed. When she turned on the lamp, nothing was there. But the floor was covered in mud, a spiral drawn into the dust. Helen left at dawn and never returned. Her notes were published only after her death. And in the margins of one entry, scribbled in shaking pencil, was a question. Who filled the 14th chair? There was never any record of a 14th follower. Refuge Hill had 138 names. The chairs, always 13. Unless the chair wasn't meant for them, unless it was meant for one of us. In 1965, a child went missing near the Refuge Hill site. Then another in 1972. Always the same pattern. Disappeared near the boundary, no signs of struggle. Only their shoes placed neatly in a circle. Locals whispered, of course. Blamed the woods, blamed the land. But none of them remembered the name. None of them spoke of the trench. Until a fire crew, putting out a lightning blaze in 1984, unearthed it. Still open, still perfectly dug. Only now it was wider, and it smelled like wax. The trench had no bottom, or at least none the crew could confirm. When they dropped a flare, it simply disappeared. No sound, no light, just swallowed by the dark. A man named Kent Holloway, a seasoned firefighter with 14 years of experience, volunteered to descend. He secured a harness, tied off the line, and went in with a handheld radio. He never reached the bottom. 37 feet in, the rope went slack. His voice cut off mid-sentence. All they recovered was the radio, melted, and the harness, neatly folded at the edge of the trench, hours later. After that, the site was sealed, officially deemed structurally unstable and geologically hazardous. The report was buried, as was the land. Trees were planted, fences erected, and yet, people kept coming. Paranormal investigators, students, curious trespassers, most found nothing, but a few found chairs. One teenager, camping illegally on the site in '91, returned to his tent to find it circled by 13 old wooden chairs. They were cracked, dusty, and still warm to the touch. Another group in 2003 reported hearing a child humming behind the trees. Always the same tune, a low, droning melody with no words. In 2014, the land was sold to a development company planning to build luxury cabins. That plan fell through when the construction crew walked off the job, 2 members missing, the rest refusing to speak to investigators. A drone survey revealed that all aerial photos of the land came back corrupted. Not static, just blank, as if nothing existed there. Which brings us to now. In the fall of 2022, a series of anonymous emails began circulating among academic folklore circles. Each email had no subject, no greeting, just a date and a location. March 3, 2023. Refuge Hill. Attached was a single photo. A new chair, modern, plastic, office style, but it had no legs, just roots, growing out of concrete. This time, people took notice. The land was breached again, this time by a group of self-proclaimed truth-seekers. Among them was a woman named Cara Bell, an archivist and amateur historian who had spent 6 years tracking cult sites across the South. Her footage was uploaded live to her channel. It lasted 12 minutes. It begins with a walk through the woods. The light dims, though the sky is clear. Birds stop singing. She narrates what she sees. Moss, rusted fence posts, indentations where a foundation once lay. Then she finds it. The trench. Still open. Still breathing. The camera shakes. She whispers, "It's warm." Her breath fogs, though the temperature reads 89 degrees. And then, over the microphone, a faint knock. Once. Twice. Then a dragging sound, slow and wet, circling the perimeter. At the 11-minute mark, her voice drops to a whisper. "It's not empty," she says. "The trench. It's not waiting. It's remembering." Then static. The stream ends. Kara was never found. Her car was located a mile away, keys in the ignition. The only thing left behind at the trench site was her phone, cracked, covered in red wax. The footage remains online, unexplained, undeleted. Those who've watched it often report strange dreams. Dreams of spirals, of chairs turning in slow circles, of being called by name, not shouted, but whispered from the dirt. One viewer, a psychiatrist from Baltimore, reported waking up to find muddy footprints in his apartment, leading from the fire escape to his office, where his client chair now faced the wall. Others report losing time, standing in front of their screens, unable to move for hours. Some simply delete the video and say nothing more, but the melody persists, low, wordless, humming, like a memory folding in on itself, like a voice too old to forget. And the knock, now it comes through speakers, through dreams, through the ache in your jaw when you grind your teeth in sleep. It wants you to remember, because somewhere not far from the roots of what we call history, there is a trench, still open, still widening, and beside it, chairs, waiting, counting, and there's still one empty, just one. There's a phrase that kept surfacing in the journals, in the oral testimonies, even scratched into a barn beam that survived the fire. When the 13th stands, the earth will forget its shape. It made no sense to linguists. They attributed it to religious metaphor. But the locals, they whispered something different. They said it wasn't metaphor at all. They said it was instruction. In early 2023, a group of historians and folklorists attempted a controlled excavation at the Refuge Hill site. They brought ground-penetrating radar, seismic mapping tools, and an independent team of documentarians to film the dig. For 11 days, they found nothing. But on the 12th day, beneath the soil at the southern edge of the trench, they struck something solid. At first, they believed it was petrified wood, but the chemical structure was wrong. Organic, yet fossilized. It rang like bone, but was laced with fibers, fibers that still moved when exposed to air. Then came the scent. It wasn't rot, it wasn't mold, it was perfume. Old, floral, familiar. One of the interns, a student from UT Austin, collapsed. Said she saw a girl with no eyes sitting in a high-backed chair. She said the girl was humming, then bleeding, then laughing. She wouldn't stop screaming after that. She was sedated, flown home. She never returned to school. The dig was halted. But one camera kept running. It captured 43 continuous minutes of silence. Then, the sound of creaking wood. Then, one by one, 12 chairs emerging from the soil. Fully intact, upright, facing outward. And then a final sound, the breath of something massive inhaling beneath the earth. It was uploaded accidentally. Raw footage meant to be archived. The uploader claimed they never clicked publish. The metadata supports that. And yet, it was viewed 112,000 times in the first 48 hours before being taken down by YouTube for disturbing content. Those who managed to download it reported the file became corrupted within a week. Some said it wouldn't delete, just renamed itself to the viewer's name and replicated. One woman said the file began playing on her phone while it was powered off. Just the sound. Just the creaking. By summer, a pattern emerged. Across small towns in Texas, 13 reported disappearances, all within 50 miles of Refuge Hill. No connection between the victims, no physical evidence. But in each case, the victim's last known location had a chair facing a wall. Always one chair. Always warm to the touch. In September 2023, a former seminary professor named Dr. Elwood Hargrove released a self-published report titled The Doctrine of the Empty Seat. He had tracked the Covenant sect's writing since 1987 and believed they were not a death cult, but rather preservationists of a ritual designed to pause the world's forgetting. He believed the chairs were not memorials, but anchors. He theorized that each member of the sect took a seat in a precise order. Once seated, they would not move, not speak, not eat. They became vessels, not for possession, but for memory, a holding cell for the consciousness of something ancient and vast, something that couldn't be killed, only remembered, and that the 13th chair was for it, and that no one had ever dared sit in it. Until now, in October, hikers found a new trail near Refuge Hill. It was not there the month before. Perfectly symmetrical, etched into the earth as if by blade. At the end, a single chair, ornate, ivory-colored, fresh blood on the armrests, a set of footprints leading to it, none leading away. The prints were barefoot, too small for an adult, too wide for a child. That night, residents across the region reported power outages, just after midnight. All lights out for exactly 13 minutes. Phones, watches, even wind-up clocks stalled. And when power returned, every screen in the county displayed the same thing. A live feed of a field of 12 chairs, now filled, and one more in the center. Empty, facing the camera as if waiting for you. The live feed disappeared 13 minutes after it began. No announcement, no trace. The URL returned a 404 error. Yet thousands reported seeing it, some live, some hours later, as if it had replayed independently on their devices, even those not connected to the internet. Screens flickered, flashed, and then went dark. What followed was silence, not just online, but physical. Reports emerged from Bell County, Travis County, and as far as New Mexico. For 7 consecutive nights, rural families reported the same phenomenon. 13 knocks at their door, no one there, just a chair, some wooden, some metal, some plastic, dragged directly in front of the threshold. Every night, closer. A family near Waco fled after finding their daughter sitting in the chair, eyes closed, whispering numbers backward in a voice that didn't match her own. She did not remember doing it. By November, Texas authorities began quietly consulting folklore researchers, bringing in archivists, even Vatican liaisons. Internal memos from the Texas Department of Public Safety were leaked showing they had labeled the case Spiritual Contagion, Category Red. Meanwhile, Elwood Hargrove disappeared. His last known contact was an encrypted video sent to a colleague. In it, he looked disheveled, frantic. He claimed the 13th had chosen someone, and that they weren't supposed to begin again until the forgetting was complete. He ended with a warning. If the chair moves on its own, leave the house, burn the floor, salt the ground, and don't look where it used to be. Then static. After that, a second wave of vanishings, this time focused on descendants of the original Covenant sect. Genealogy forums lit up with activity. People discovered shared surnames tied to the region. Some deleted their accounts. Others reported visions, dreams of being buried alive while seated, unable to scream. Several committed suicide. One woman in Oklahoma left a note. I saw myself in the chair. I didn't blink for 13 minutes. Then she opened her eyes, and it wasn't me. Simultaneously, physical anomalies began appearing. In the limestone cliffs above Refuge Hill, 13 vertical lines, like claw marks, carved themselves into the rock overnight. No equipment could replicate them, and beneath each, black sap bled from the stone, which burned through latex gloves. Analyzed under electron microscope, it contained human DNA, but no known blood group. Local wildlife changed too. Deer began gathering in fields in symmetrical circles of 13. Coyotes stopped howling. Owls went silent. The ecosystem itself seemed to fall into a holding pattern, as if waiting for something, as if fearing interruption. And then, on December 13th, thunder without clouds. The earth trembled, just slightly, just once. At 3:13 a.m., all over Texas, chairs turned on their own. Hospitals reported mass sleepwalking events. 138 cases exactly, where individuals stood up, found a chair, and sat facing a wall, murmuring in unison, "We remember the forgetting." They could not be awakened. Medical scans showed normal vitals, but brain activity spiked to levels seen only in seizures or psychedelic overdose. The patients sweated the same floral perfume from their skin. Blood tests showed it wasn't human. Not anymore. Then came the children's drawings. Hundreds mailed to local news outlets, all from different towns. Each featured a similar image. A white chair on fire, surrounded by 12 dark figures, all faceless. In the center, hovering above the flames, a shape like a girl, but not a girl. Long limbs, empty eyes, smiling. And the caption, scrawled in crayon or pencil, "Her turn." By year's end, 13 counties reported chair fires. Not house fires, just chairs. Each one was old, burned from the inside out. No accelerant, no source of ignition. Each time, witnesses claimed to hear singing, a child's voice out of key, repeating the same melody. The last town to report such an incident was Cross Hollow. A farmer found a trail of burned grass leading to his barn. Inside were 12 chairs, and a note, pinned to the 13th, "Sit before midnight, or she chooses for you." He did not sit. The next morning he was gone. In his place, a new chair, carved with his name. The town is empty now. No sign of struggle. Meals left uneaten. Beds unmade. But every home has one thing in common: a chair. Centered, facing the door, waiting. Still warm. Officially, the state of Texas declared the Refuge Hill phenomenon a mass psychogenic illness, a convenient phrase to file away what can't be explained. The land where the Covenant Sect once lived has been declared restricted under environmental protection orders, though no wildlife or vegetation remains. Just soil, loose and dark, and a perimeter of motion sensors that no one will publicly acknowledge. But there's movement again. A small boy from Del Rio drew a picture in Sunday school. It showed a girl in a long white dress, arms outstretched, hovering above a broken chair. Around her were 12 people, heads bowed. The teacher asked who it was. The boy whispered, "She's the last." Across 3 states, similar images surfaced again. More chairs, more figures. Always the number 13. Always a central feminine figure with no eyes. Some researchers believe these drawings appear in waves, synced to lunar patterns. Others suggest something deeper, a ritual memory embedded in bloodlines. Because it didn't start in Refuge Hill. It didn't even start in Texas. Records unearthed in the basement of a burned seminary in South Carolina revealed a pattern dating back to 1723. An early sect called the Chosen of the Final Seat. Their doctrine was simple and terrifying. God would return when 13 sat and remembered. The problem? One of them always forgot. And when one forgets, they must be replaced. The sect migrated westward over generations. Virginia, Georgia, Mississippi, each time leaving behind foundations with no buildings, graveyards with no names, and journals half burned. Every 27 to 33 years the pattern emerged. Mass vanishings. Cultic behavior, a chair. Always the chair. Refuge Hill was just the latest, not the first, and possibly not the last. In 2023, a real estate agent in Montana received a key in the mail. No return address. No explanation. Just a note. Property awaiting occupancy. The address led to an abandoned schoolhouse in the wilderness. Inside, 13 chairs arranged in a circle. One faced the center. On it, carved deep into the wood, "She is memory." The agent reported it, but 2 weeks later, he vanished. The house is sealed now, and locals claim it cries at night. Not wind, not coyotes, crying. In Vermont, a retired folklorist named Miriam Hauser uncovered a lullaby in an obscure 1791 hymnal. The lyrics are nearly identical to what was heard on the live stream from the boy in Part 6. "Sit down, sweet shadow, still your head. The circle's cold, the seat is red. Forget your name, forget the floor. She walks behind and counts to 4. No author listed, no known tune assigned. Miriam later claimed she heard the song in her dreams, sung by her mother, who died before she was born. She left her home 3 days later without shoes and was found miles away, seated in a collapsed barn on a wooden crate. The crate was empty, save for a single nail sticking upward. She hadn't sat on it, but someone else had. The final entry in her notebook read, 13 only works if 12 believe. The 13th knows. In early 2024, a group of digital archivists compiling abandoned cult records stumbled upon an encrypted file hosted on a server in Ukraine. Inside were images taken with 19th century camera plates, real ones, verified by age and chemical composition. Each showed different groups, children, elders, families, seated around a central figure in white. Some were smiling, some crying, some blurred. But always 13. The archivists noticed something chilling. In each photo, taken decades apart, the central figure was identical. Same height, same posture, same braided hair. And in the last photo, dated 1860, the year of the Refuge Hill vanishing, the central figure is no longer seated. She's standing, arms wide, facing the camera, smiling. Whispers in the Cellar has spent over 2 years gathering what can be gathered. But we don't broadcast this episode like the others. No premiere, no schedule. Just this upload. Quiet, anonymous, like the chair itself. Why? Because the moment this story is known, it begins again. The 13th only comes when the story is told. When someone remembers the forgetting. We don't tell you to share this video. We ask you not to, unless you've already seen her. Unless the chair in your house has moved. Unless you've heard humming from a child that isn't yours. Then share it. Then warn others. Then don't sit. Don't answer knocks at night. Don't hum the tune. And if you must sit, check if the seat is warm. If it is, stand immediately. Because there's one chair left, and it might already have your name on it.